She was already freezing to death when she heard it. A weak, broken cry buried beneath the snow. Touching the cub meant execution. Walking away meant letting a child die. And she chose wrong. When the Alpha King finally found her body in the storm, his son was alive. And the Omega was not supposed to be. Welcome to Paranormal Mate Tales. If you've been here before, you know what's coming. If you're new, brace yourself for a story of fated love and dangerous bonds. I'm Debbie Peters, and today's tale shifts the balance forever. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. And when it's over, return and score it from 0 to 10. Now, the story begins. The wind came first, shrieking down from the northern peaks like a pack of hungry wolves. Then came the snow, thick, blinding, merciless. The white veil had descended upon Frostmere Vale. Elenethra Lumiel pressed herself against the outer wall of the healing house, her threadbare cloak doing little against the cold that clawed at her skin. Through the frosted window, she could see the warmth inside. Alphas and their families huddled near the hearth. Children wrapped in furs, bowls of stew being passed between calloused hands. No one looked her way. They never did. She pulled her basket closer, checking the meager contents. 3 sprigs of winter root she'd dug from the frozen earth that morning, a handful of dried sage, and 2 copper coins she'd earned mending a torn cloak. It wasn't enough for bread, let alone shelter for the night. Omega. The voice was sharp, dismissive. Elenethra turned to find Beta Garrick standing in the doorway, his broad frame blocking the light and warmth from within. We're sealing the doors. Storm's getting worse. Move along. Please, she said quietly, hating the tremor in her voice. Just until it passes. I can help with... We don't need Omega hands touching our supplies. His lip curled. You know the law. Unclaimed Omegas aren't pack. Find your own shelter. The door slammed shut. She heard the heavy bolt slide into place. Elenethra stood there for a moment, watching her breath turn to frost in the air. This was the way of things in Frostmere Vale. Alphas and their bonded Omegas had value, protection, purpose. But an Omega without a pack, without a mate, without family? She was a shadow, expendable, invisible. Her parents had once told her she was born beneath a cruel winter moon, marked from the start. After they died in the territorial purge 5 years ago, she'd learned the truth of those words. She survived by making herself useful in ways that didn't threaten, didn't demand, didn't expect. She mended what was broken, gathered what was needed, and accepted whatever scraps were offered. She'd learned that kindness toward an Omega was a rare and dangerous thing. The wind howled louder now, and the village square had emptied entirely. Every door was barred, every window shuttered. The White Veil was legendary. Storms that lasted days, that buried entire homesteads, that swallowed travelers whole. Elenethra turned toward the forest path, toward the small cave she sometimes used when the pack house was full. Her feet were numb, her fingers aching, but she'd survived worse. Then she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the wind. High-pitched, desperate, broken, a cry. She stopped, her heart hammering against her ribs. It came again, fainter this time, swallowed almost immediately by the storm. Every instinct told her to keep walking, to save herself, to remember that her life, small and worthless as it was still the only one she had. But her feet wouldn't move forward. They turned instead toward the sound, toward the darkness of Black Pine Forest, toward whatever fragile thing was dying in the snow. And Elenethra Lumiel, the forgotten Omega of Frostmere Vale, stepped into the White Veil. The forest swallowed her whole. Within 3 steps, the village lights vanished behind a wall of white. The wind tore at her cloak, flinging ice crystals that cut like tiny blades across her cheeks and hands. Snow filled her mouth when she tried to breathe, and the cold pressed against her chest like a physical weight. She should turn back. She knew this with the certainty of someone who'd survived 23 winters in Frostmere Vale. The White Veil showed no mercy to the foolish or the brave. It killed them all the same. But the cry came again, weaker now, and her feet kept moving. The Black Pine Forest was ancient, its trees twisted and gnarled, their branches heavy with snow that fell in sudden, suffocating sheets. Elenethra's worn boots slipped on hidden ice. Twice she fell, her palms splitting open against frozen bark. Blood dripped onto the snow, black in the darkness. Then she saw him, a small shape beneath a fallen branch, half buried in snow and ice. Silver gray fur matted with frost. Paws too small, body too still. Elenethra dropped to her knees, her basket forgotten. She swept the snow away with trembling hands, revealing a wolf cub barely larger than a rabbit. His breathing was shallow, ribs fluttering beneath his fur like bird wings. One back leg was trapped beneath a thick root where ice had formed, locking him in place. Her breath caught. Even through the frost and blood, she could see the markings, silver crescents behind his ears, the distinctive pattern on his shoulder. Royal bloodline. This wasn't some abandoned runt or lost wanderer's cub. This was death. The law was absolute. Only bonded pack members could touch royal young. An unclaimed omega found with a noble cub would be executed without trial. Her body left for the carrion birds as warning to others who forgot their place. Elenethra's hands hovered over him, shaking from more than cold. She could leave. No one would ever know she'd been here. The storm would claim him, and she could return to her small, invisible life. The cub's eyes opened, pale amber, glazed with pain. He looked at her. Just looked. No snarl, no fear. Only the quiet acceptance of something too young to understand death, but old enough to feel it coming. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Her fingers closed around the ice. She pulled, and the ice cut deep, reopening the wounds on her palms. Blood made her grip slippery, useless. She tried again, gritting her teeth against the pain, using a rock to chip away at the thicker sections. The cub whimpered but didn't struggle, as if he understood she was trying to help. Finally, with a crack that sounded too loud in the storm's howl, the ice gave way. The cub's leg came free. Elenethra pulled off her cloak, the only thing between her and the killing cold, and wrapped it around his small body. He was shivering violently, his heartbeat rapid and weak beneath her fingers. She tucked him against her chest, curling her body around him, trying to share what little warmth she had left. "It's all right," she murmured into his fur. "You're not alone." The cub pressed closer, his nose tucking beneath her chin. A soft, broken sound escaped him. Not quite a whimper, not quite a sigh. Trust. The wind screamed louder. Snow fell faster. Elenethra looked up and realized with cold clarity that she couldn't see the path anymore. Couldn't see the trees. Couldn't see anything but white. The storm had closed around them like a fist, and there was no way out. Elenethra found a hollow between two ancient pines where the snow had drifted into a natural alcove. It wasn't shelter, not truly, but it broke the worst of the wind. She crawled inside, clutching the cub against her chest, and pressed her back against the frozen bark. The cold was already inside her. She could feel it in her bones, creeping through her limbs like slow poison. Her fingers had gone white, then gray. She couldn't feel her toes anymore. But the cub was still shivering, still breathing, still alive. Elenethra tucked him deeper into the folds of her cloak, wrapping it twice around his small body. She curled herself around him, making her body a wall against the wind, a barrier against the cold that wanted to claim them both. "Stay with me," she whispered, her lips barely moving, say, "Just a little longer." She breathed against his fur, slow and steady, letting the warmth of her exhale reach his frost-covered nose. His heartbeat fluttered against her palm. Too fast, too weak, but it was there. She matched her breathing to his, as if she could will her own life force into his fragile body. The numbness spread. Her thoughts began to blur at the edges, memories mixing with present. Her mother's face, her father's laugh, the scent of bread she could never afford. Dizziness pulled at her, and she fought it with the same stubborn will that had kept her alive all these years. "You know what I learned?" she murmured into the cub's ear. "When you have nothing, you learn what truly matters. Not gold, not status, just kindness. Just knowing that someone saw you, that someone cared." The cub's shivering began to ease. His breathing steadied, deepened. He pressed his small muzzle against her throat, and she felt the faintest warmth there. Life, holding on. You're going to survive this, she promised, though her own voice was fading. Someone will find you. Someone who matters. You'll grow strong and brave, and maybe you'll remember that an Omega kept you warm when the world went cold. Her eyelids grew heavy. So heavy. The pain in her hands and feet had become something distant, abstract. The darkness wasn't frightening anymore. It felt almost peaceful, like falling into deep water. An Omega's warmth preserving royal blood, the powerless protecting the powerful, the expendable choosing to be essential. Elenithra's arms tightened one last time around the cub, and then the strength left her entirely. Her eyes closed, her breathing slowed. Snow began to cover her still form, gentle and relentless, erasing her from the world as it had always tried to do. Beneath the white blanket, pressed against her failing heart, Torin lifted his small head. His amber eyes cleared, focusing. He looked at the Omega who had given everything for him and released a sound into the storm. Weak, broken, desperate. A howl. Not of fear, but of calling. Of refusing to let her disappear. Roderick Vane had known war. He had buried warriors, negotiated treaties written in blood, and carried the weight of an entire realm on his shoulders for 15 years. But nothing, no battlefield, no betrayal, no loss, had prepared him for the terror of a missing child. His son, his only heir, gone. The attack had come at dusk. Rogue wolves breaching the eastern border while Torin played near the Black Pine Edge with his nursemaid. In the chaos, the boy had vanished. Taken. Lost. The word didn't matter. The result was the same. Roderick had been tracking for 8 hours through the White Veil, his wolf senses pushing past exhaustion, past reason. His beast howled inside him, clawing against his ribs, demanding he move faster, search harder, refuse to accept what the storm was telling him, that he was too late. His inner wolf suddenly surged forward, nearly taking control. Not panic. Recognition. A scent. Faint beneath the ice and pine, but unmistakable. Torin. Roderick broke into a run, his boots pounding through knee-deep snow. His heart hammered against his chest as possibilities cascaded through his mind. His son frozen beneath a drift, trapped in a hunter's snare or worse. Bait for an ambush. He'd killed 3 rogues already tonight. There could be more. He burst through a cluster of pines and stopped. The scene before him made no sense. A body lay curled in the snow, half buried, utterly still, small, fragile, female. And pressed against her chest, shielded by a threadbare cloak and thin arms, was Torin, alive. The cub's head lifted at Roderick's approach, amber eyes locking onto his father's. But Torin didn't move toward him. Instead, the boy positioned himself over the Omega's face, a low, protective growl rumbling in his small throat. Roderick approached slowly, his wolf instincts screaming contradictions. Relief that his son lived. Rage at whoever had caused this. And something else, something that made his chest tighten and his wolf pace restlessly beneath his skin. He knelt beside them. The Omega was barely breathing. Her lips were blue, her skin pale as death. Blood had frozen on her hands where she'd torn them raw. Her eyes were closed, but there was something peaceful in her expression, as if she'd accepted her fate without fear. She'd saved him. This Omega, this stranger, had found his son and chosen to die for him. Torin, Roderick said softly. Come here, boy. The cub whimpered but didn't move. His small body trembled, torn between obedience and loyalty to the Omega who'd kept him warm. Roderick reached out carefully, placing his hand on the Omega's throat. A pulse. Faint. Stuttering. But there. You're both coming with me, he said, more to himself than to his son. He lifted the Omega into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and stood. Torin immediately scrambled onto her chest, refusing to be separated. Roderick's wolf surged again, and this time it wasn't panic or rage. It was something far more dangerous. The faintest thread of awareness, pulling at him like a hook beneath his ribs. His wolf recognized something in her scent beneath the frost and blood. something that whispered mine with a certainty that both terrified and enraged him. No, not now, not this. Move, he commanded his escort, who'd finally caught up. Both of them to Vainhold Keep. Wake every healer we have. He looked down at the Omega's face, at the sacrifice she'd made without thought of reward, and felt the first crack in the armor he'd worn for 15 years. Who are you? He whispered into the storm. The healers worked through the night. Elenithra's body temperature had dropped so low that the head healer, Marin, had summoned the death priest twice. Her heartbeat kept fading, stuttering back to life only to weaken again. Frostbite had blackened 3 fingers on her left hand and both her smallest toes. The decision to amputate was discussed in hushed voices outside her door. But at dawn on the 3rd day, her eyes opened. Roderick was there when it happened. He'd kept vigil in the corridor, telling himself it was gratitude, duty, curiosity, anything but the truth his wolf kept snarling at him. When Marin emerged with tears in her eyes and a cautious smile, he was on his feet before she could speak. She's awake, Your Majesty. Weak, but aware. He entered the healing room to find Elenethra propped against pillows, her left hand wrapped in clean bandages, her face still too pale, but alive. Impossibly, stubbornly alive. Torin was curled at her side, his small body pressed against her ribs. The cub hadn't left her since they'd arrived at Vainhold Keep. He'd bitten 2 royal nurses who'd tried to remove him and refused food until Elenethra's fingers had twitched against his fur. Your Majesty, Elenethra whispered, her voice hoarse. She tried to bow her head, but the movement made her wince. Don't. Roderick moved closer, surprised by the sharpness in his own voice. You've done enough bowing for a lifetime. Her gray eyes met his, uncertain, searching. The cub, is he alive because of you? He gestured to Torin, who was watching him with uncharacteristic wariness, as if daring his father to separate them again. The healers say he'll recover fully. No lasting damage. Relief flooded her expression, so pure and unguarded that something twisted in Roderick's chest. Thank you, she breathed. I should be saying that to you. Outside the door, the whispers had already begun. Court nobles murmuring about manipulation, enchantments, Omega cunning. How convenient that an unclaimed Omega had found the lost heir. How suspicious that the boy refused to leave her side. Surely she'd used some trick, some forbidden magic. Roderick had silenced 3 separate accusations with looks that promised violence. He'd also investigated, thoroughly. His spymaster had returned with a report that confirmed what his instincts already knew. Elenethra Lumiel was nobody. Orphaned at 18, no magic, no hidden lineage, no wealthy patrons or political connections. She'd survived in Frostmere Vale by being invisible, by asking for nothing, by accepting scraps as if they were gifts. She'd risked her life for a stranger's child because it was the right thing to do. The realization unsettled him more than any battlefield ever had. You saved my son, Roderick said quietly. Whatever you need, shelter, work, protection, it's yours. I don't need anything. Her fingers stroked Torin's fur absently. I'm just glad he's safe. You nearly died. Better than doing nothing. She said it simply, as if the math were obvious, as if her life were a fair trade for a cub she'd never met. Roderick's wolf stirred, pressing against his control. He forced it down, though the thread between them seemed to pull tighter with each passing moment. Rest, he said, stepping back before he did something foolish. We'll speak more when you're stronger. He was at the door when her voice stopped him. Your Majesty? The cub? Who does he belong to? Roderick turned, meeting her eyes. His name is Torin, and he's my son. The color drained from her face. Understanding dawned. What she'd risked, what she'd touched, what the law demanded for such transgression. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear I didn't. I know. And somehow, impossibly, he did. Sleep, Elenethra. You're safe here. But as he left, he wondered which of them he was trying to convince. The bond grew in quiet moments. Elenethra remained at Vainhold Keep, officially as Torrin's caretaker while she recovered. The title was a kindness. Everyone knew she had nowhere else to go, Sarai. But what began as charity became something neither she nor Roderick had anticipated. She taught Torrin to read emotions in voices, in the tilt of ears and the space between words. When the cub grew frustrated with lessons, she showed him patience instead of discipline. When he snapped at servants, she knelt beside him and asked what hurt, rather than punishing the behavior. Kindness isn't weakness, she told him one afternoon, her scarred hand gentle on his head. It's choosing to be strong enough not to cause harm. Roderick watched from the doorway, something tightening in his chest. He'd been raised in the old ways, dominance, hierarchy, strength above all. Yet here was an Omega teaching his son that power meant protecting, not controlling. And Torrin was thriving. The mate bond whispered between them during stolen conversations in the library, when Roderick asked about her life and she answered without embellishment or shame. During evening walks when Torrin insisted they both accompany him, and their hands would brush, sending warmth up Roderick's arm that had nothing to do with touch. He felt it most when she laughed, rare and genuine, and his wolf settled in ways it never had before. But the court was merciless. Whispers followed Elenethra through corridors. Servants gave her the coldest rooms, the smallest portions. Lady Severin, a high-ranking noblewoman, made her disdain public, referring to Elenethra as the king's charity case, within earshot of everyone. Elenethra endured it with the same quiet dignity she'd shown her entire life, but Roderick saw the way she shrank, the way fear crept back into her eyes. "You don't have to stay," he told her one evening, hating himself for offering escape when his wolf howled at the thought of her leaving. "Where would I go?" she asked simply. "And who would remind Torrin that he's loved, not just obeyed?" Roderick had no answer. The challenge came during a formal court assembly. Lady Severin rose, her voice carrying across the hall. "Your Majesty, I speak for many when I question the appropriateness of an unclaimed Omega residing in your personal quarters, influencing your heir." Her smile was poison wrapped in silk. "Surely you can see how this undermines pack law and royal dignity." Every eye turned to Elenethra, standing beside Torrin at the edge of the dais. Roderick's wolf surged forward, ready to defend. But Elenethra simply straightened her shoulders and met Lady Severin's gaze without flinching. "You're right," Elenethra said, her voice quiet but steady. "I am an Omega, unclaimed, without title or rank." Murmurs rippled through the court. Lady Severin's smile widened, sensing victory. "But I did not come here seeking power," Elenethra continued. "I came here dying because I chose a child's life over my own. If that undermines your laws, perhaps your laws need examination." The murmurs turned to shocked whispers. Lord Vex, an elder councilman, stood. "The Omega oversteps. Your Majesty, the court demands she prove her worth through proper channels, dominance trials, bloodline verification, or removal." Roderick's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Elenethra stepped forward. "I will not fight for dominance," she said clearly. "Violence is not the only measure of worth. Instead, I propose something this court has never considered, that I prove my value through service and reform." "Reform?" Lady Severin laughed. "What could an Omega possibly reform?" Elenethra's scarred hand rested on Torrin's shoulder. "I propose education programs for all Omegas, so they're not left to starve when fate turns cruel. I propose cub safety laws that protect all young ones, not just those born to noble blood. And I propose we recognize that the invisible labor of those you call weak is what keeps this realm standing." The court erupted, half in outrage, half in stunned silence. "She speaks of changing centuries of tradition," Lord Vex snarled. "Tradition built on who suffers quietly," Elenethra shot back, her voice rising. "I was invisible my entire life. I watched Omegas die in winter because no one deemed them worth saving. I watched children abandoned because their bloodlines weren't pure enough. The night I found Torrin, I had nothing. No power, no protection, no future. But I had compassion. and that compassion saved the heir to your throne. She turned to face the assembled nobles, her gray eyes blazing with quiet fire. If my presence here offends you, then let it offend you. But ask yourselves, when the storm came, where were you? When a child cried in the dark, who answered? The Omega you despise, or the nobles who value tradition over life? The silence was absolute. Roderick rose from his throne, and every head turned toward him. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Elenethra Lumiel will remain at Vainhold Keep, with full protection and voice in this court. Anyone who challenges this challenges me directly. Lady Severin paled. Lord Vex opened his mouth, then closed it. But it was Roderick's spymaster, Henrik, who broke the tension. He strode into the hall, face grim, carrying a leather satchel. Your Majesty, Henrik said urgently, we've uncovered the truth about the White Veil storm. It was no natural phenomenon. The court collectively inhaled. Rogue shamans, hired by internal conspirators, engineered the storm to eliminate the heir. Henrik's gaze swept the room. 3 nobles have been implicated. They meant for Torin to die, and for the succession to fall into chaos. Gasps, accusations, panic. Roderick's eyes found Elenethra's across the chaos. She'd saved not just his son, but the realm's entire future. And the court, whether they accepted it or not, had just witnessed an Omega dismantle their prejudice with nothing but truth. The traitors were arrested within the hour. The court dispersed in chaos, nobles whispering behind their hands, alliances shifting like snow and wind. But Elenethra felt none of the triumph she'd expected. Instead, exhaustion pressed against her bones, and fear coiled tight in her chest. Roderick found her in the garden at twilight, standing beneath bare winter branches with Torin at her feet. You were magnificent today, he said quietly. She didn't turn. I was terrified. That's what made it magnificent. He moved closer, careful not to crowd her. Elenethra, the council has agreed to your reforms. They want to formalize your position, as Luna, as my mate. Her breath caught. She'd known this was coming, felt it in every stolen glance, every brush of warmth between them. The mate bond hummed beneath her skin, undeniable and terrifying. I don't want power, she whispered. I know. I'm afraid of becoming someone I'm not, of losing the part of me that remembered what it was like to be invisible. Roderick stood beside her now, close enough that she could feel his warmth. Then don't lose it. Use it. Every reform you propose, every law you change, let it come from that Omega who survived by seeing what others refused to. What if I fail? Then we failed together. His hand found hers, scarred palm against calloused fingers. I'm not asking you to be Luna because tradition demands it, or because the court requires it. I'm asking because I've watched you teach my son that strength means choosing kindness. Because when I look at you, I see everything I was taught to dismiss, and everything I now know matters most. Tears burned her eyes. Roderick, this is not a command, he said fiercely. This is a choice. Your choice. If you walk away tonight, I will honor it. But if you stay... His voice softened. If you stay, know that you are not alone. Not anymore. The mate bond sang between them, no longer a whisper but a certainty. Torin looked up at both of them, his amber eyes solemn. Then deliberately he moved to sit between them, one paw touching Elenethra's foot, his shoulder pressed against Roderick's leg. Choosing them both, refusing to let either walk away. Elenethra's breath shuddered out. She thought of the girl who'd scavenged herbs for scraps, who'd been invisible, who'd believed her life held no value. She thought of the woman she could become, not despite her past, but because of it. I'll stay, she said quietly. But not as decoration or symbol. I stay as a partner. I stay to change laws that protect the powerless. I stay to ensure no child, Omega, Alpha, or otherwise, is ever deemed expendable. Roderick's hand tightened on hers. Then stay, and let's build something better than what we inherited. She turned to face him fully, and for the first time since the storm, she allowed herself to believe in a future. Together, she agreed. The mate bond settled between them like falling snow, gentle, inevitable, and transforming everything it touched. The ceremony took place under a full winter moon, in the same forest where Elenethra had nearly died. She stood beside Roderick Vane in a gown of silver and white, her scarred hand visible for all to see. The pack assembled, thousands strong, and watched as an Omega who had been invisible became the heart of the realm. "I name you Luna, not because you are strong in the ways we have always measured strength," Roderick said, his voice carrying through the silent woods, "but because you showed us a strength we had forgotten, the courage to choose compassion over survival." The pack howled their acceptance. Even Lady Severin bowed her head, though grudgingly. But Elenethra's true legacy began in the months that followed. The Omega Protection Act passed first, ensuring housing, food, and medical care for all pack members regardless of rank. Then came the cub safety laws, mandating that no young wolf could be turned away from shelter or aid. Schools opened across the westbound realms, not just for nobles, but for every Omega who had been told their mind held no value. Elenethra taught in those schools herself, standing before students who looked at her with the same hunger she'd once carried. She told them her story without embellishment. The cold, the fear, the choice that changed everything. "You are not invisible," she would say. "You never were. The world simply refused to see you, but now we will make them see." 2 years after the White Veil storm, Elenethra walked through Blackpine Forest with Torin at her side. He'd grown tall and strong, his silver-gray fur gleaming in the winter sunlight. Where once he'd been a dying cub, now he was a young wolf who understood that power meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. "Do you remember?" Torin asked, pausing at the place where she'd found him. "Every moment," Elenethra said softly. The snow fell gently around them, but she was no longer cold. Wrapped in furs gifted by grateful Omegas across the realm, surrounded by a pack that had learned to measure worth by character rather than rank, she finally understood what warmth truly meant. The people called her the Frost Mother Queen, the Omega who had risked everything and taught a kingdom that mercy was not weakness, but the very foundation of strength. And in the quiet of that winter forest, with Torin beside her and Roderick's hand finding hers, Elenethra knew she had found what every forgotten soul searches for: belonging, purpose, home. If you stayed until the end, thank you. Truly. Stories like this only survive because people choose not to turn away, just like Elenethra didn't. If this story moved you, even a little, don't let it end here. Subscribing tells the world that compassion still has an audience, that protecting the powerless still matters. Every new subscriber is another voice saying, "We will not ignore the invisible." Thank you for being part of this. Thank you for choosing kindness. And thank you for helping this story and this movement live on.